This is Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Samoch Tes, and as we pick it up 4 lines in the bottom, in the first Amud of this new parak Ben Seira Mayra, we'd like to dedicate all the learning as an incredible zchos Rafua Shalima for Tinok Ben Miriam Ahuva Psiyata Dishmaya, the incredible and infinite power of Koyach HaTorah should continue showing its refuah as Tinok Ben Miriam Ahuva continues getting stronger each and every day. B'seich sha'ar chayle Yisrael. We are holding 4 lines from the bottom. As the Gemara says, last word of the line is upliga de Rabba. And this argues with Rabba. What is this? We just ended off in the middle of discussing whom can be a Ben Seira Mayra. And we discussed what if there's a child who becomes this wayward child, but he was a child born to a father who was a katan. Says the Gemara, no, he can't be Ben Seira Mayra. Because the pasuk says when there's a child to an ish, and not when there's a child to a katan. Clearly showing us that a katan, seemingly, says the Gemara, is capable of having a child. Says the Gemara, that detail, pliga di Rabba, that detail, which was Rav Chisda, argues on Rabba, Dama Rabba, katan einai moilid. Katan cannot give birth, shenemar, says the pasuk in Devarim, ein leish goyel. Says the pasuk in ein leish goyel, Bamidbar, Says the pasuk, ein leish goyel, if the man who returns has no relatives, Adam be Israel, asked the Gemara in the last slide, Shino goyel. Can it possibly be someone who has no relative? Everyone has to have some relative. Ella, rather, what must the possibly be talking about? Gezel Ger, Hakasa Midaber, talking about where a ger stole something, and a ger indeed has no relatives. So we turn over to Samach Tesamar Aleph, says the Gemara, V'yamar Rachmana, and says the Torah, Ish, Amen, says the Gemara, it's quoting the pasuk. What do we learn out from here? Says Rabba, Ish ata tzarich lachzor alav im yish lo goyalim. An ish, you have to check. Does he have goyalim? Does he have relatives? However, vim lav, and if im yish lo goyalim im lav. Whereas katan yatazar lachzor alav asar katan, you do not have to check whether he has relatives. Why? Because we know he has no relatives. What does this show? The reason being because there will be no children to a katan, shitas Rabbah, arguing on Rav Chisda that we just learned. Rav Chisda was of the opinion that indeed, even a katan can have a child, and then there just won't be a din of Ben Seira Mayra. Says the Gemara, no. This argues on Rabbah, because Rabbah clearly is of the opinion that what? The katan cannot have children. Continues the Gemara 4 lines down. Eisvei Abaye. Abaye has a kasha on Rabbah. Says the pasuk, Ish ki ishkavim isha, a man who lies with a woman. Ein li ela ish. Here we learn only a man. Ben teishan in the Aimechad, a 9-year-old Sharayu lebi aminayin that's capable of having relations. How do we know? Is included in this pasuk. In this pasuk, let's just look at the pasuk. The whole Torah of slaves. Says the Gemara of Minayin Tamalay Marvish. Says the pasuk, the extra vav comes to include a 9-year-old boy. So what do we see? We see a 9-year-old boy is included in the psukim. Is able to be having a child. Amar Le responds Abaya, Yeshloi ve'enoi mild. Says Gemara, Yeshloi. All that pasuk showed us was that there's a capability of a shechva zera. There's a capability of relations. It's true. But, says Rabbah, ve'enoi mild. Ketavua shleivia shlish, like seeds that were grown by grain that did not grow to its third. Yes, there is seed, but that seed is not capable of growing more grain. Similarly, Dami, says the Gemara, this child, yes, as well, there is seed, there is shechva zera. However, it is not capable of having other children, and that is shitas Rabbah, that a katan cannot give birth. Says the Gemara, Dvei Chizkiya Tana, Dvei Chizkiya learned Chiyazorish. Says the pasuk, if someone acts against his friend and kills him, Ish, and Dvei Chizkiya, the yeshiva of Chizkiya darshins, Ish mazid umazriya, Vin katan mazid umazriya. An Ish could be mazid as well as mazriya. That the mazid here he's borrowing, it could mean cooking it up. The Gemara is explaining, Dvei Chizkiya is learning that a child, yes, has that shechva zera, but it's in a mazriya. Katan mezid ve'in katan, mezid mazriya like shitas rabba. Amrli Ram Mordechai Rav Ashi 10 lines down. My mashra daimez lisha de bishulu. So Rav Mordechai was bothered. Where do you see in the pasuk that mezid means bishula, that it's referring to cooking up the sperm, meaning that it's able to have a child? Says the Gemara, let's go back to Bereshis. Techsed vayazid Yaakov nazid. Yaakov cooked up a stew, so we see the lashon of zad could refer to such. Says the Gemara, V'atanei Rabbi Yishmael ben v'lo av. Says the Torah that a ben becomes a ben Torah Meirer, but not an av. Hechidami, what's the case? David basar taisi shtei sairos. If the case is that what the woman conceived from a relations with a person, a boy, that already brought shtei sairos va'oil in makmi delakiv zakein, and she gives birth before he becomes a gadol, before he has the sairos milamata, as we've seen that it's lak if it surrounds his aver. Mik ashas kulehai. Is it that much amount of time? Says the Gemara, the leida takes 9 months, and in 9 months' time, of course, this child from the period of shtei sairos to having a lot of seir down there is certainly going to be. So how is it possible? V'amar Rebbe Kurus Pedai. Rebbe Kurus Pedai explains, Kol Yamav Shal Ben Seir Meir Eino Le Gimel Chadashim. All the days of Ben Seir Meir is only Gimel Chadashim, 3 months. Only for 3 months after he becomes an adult. After that, it's no longer Ben Seir Meir. So says the Gemara, but it's not Shaykh in our case. Bilvad, Elalav. So now this is going to be the Kasha back in Rabbah. Says the Gemara, Elalav. 2 lines from the Y lines. The Avar Makmi Delesi Shtei Sairos. V'oilin Makmi Delakiv Kot Zakon. It must be everything happened that the child was a katan. Ushmamina katan moilid. Proves the Gemara. So it must be, what are we proving? That a child can give birth. And that's the only way that we're able to have this drasha in the Torah. Says the Gemara on the first white line, Loi, really, I'll tell you, the Avar Basar Daisi Shtei Sairos relations, and she became pregnant after he rushed Shtei Sairos. Violet Basar Dakiv Zakan, and yes, she gives birth indeed after he has enough Sairos. Kakasha Rav Kudispai, I'll tell you, Kias Rav Dimi, Amar Amim Marava, Ben, V'loi Haroi Likroisai. So I'm going to explain it to you that he darshins up the pasuk of Ben, but now one who is fit, Roy, Likroisayav, to be called a father, and that is one who is fit to be an Av, is once there are those 3 months that pass. So Yishmael is not arguing with Rav Kudispai. It's actually a raya to how Rav Kudispai said Av. Says the Gemara Gufa, let's go a little bit deeper into this Rav Kurus Bedai that we're quoting. Amar Rav Kudispai, Amar Rav Shapti. Kol Yamav Shal Ben Seir Meir Eino Yel Gimel Chadash Bilvad. Like we just saw. Ask the Gemara 1 second about Tanan, but we learned Mishiavish Deisai, Rois Vachi Yakiv Zakan. But we learned that it's not 3 months. We learned that what is one a Ben Seir Meir? It's from the time he has Shtei Sairos. And again, we're defining the critical time that this child has to become the wayward child in order to have a din Ben Seir Meir. So proves the Gemara, you know what it is. Says the Mishnah, our Mishnah, it's from when? He has Shtei Sairos until he has Yaakov Zakan here all around. So what's the kasha? The kasha is Rav Kudispai says it's only 3 months. Answers the Gemara, Hikiv Zakan Avkav Lo Malu Gimel Chadashim, Malu Gimel Chadashim Avkav Lo Hekif. that this din of Rav Kudisbai is limiting the Mishnah. The Mishnah is teaching us that once there's Hikiv Zakan, then he cannot become a Ben Sayer Meyer, even if 3 months did not pass. And Rav Kudisbai is teaching us that if 3 months passes, even though there's not Hikiv Zakan, he can't as well. So all we're doing is we're creating a Sivkatan, an asterisk, within the din of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said it's from the time that the boy grows Shtei 2 pubic hairs until there's hair all around. Says the Gemara, now there's another qualification. It has to be within 3 months. If either 3 months passes or Hikiv Zairais, then he cannot be a Ben Sayer Meir. Says the Gemara, Yosef Rav Yaakov, Minhar Pakid Kamei de Ravina, V'Yosef Ikamar, 7 lines into the wide lines, Mishmei de Ravuna, Brei de Rav Yeshua, Shmami Namid Kurad de Despai. No, I could prove to you from Rav Kudispai, Amar Rav Shabti, Yoyledes L'Shiva Ein Obra Nikar L'Shlish Yameha. You know what I'm going to prove to you? That when a woman gives birth in 7 months, the pregnancy is not noticeable when a third of the days pass. Rather, only when a full 3 months passes. Meaning, one would think a 9-month pregnancy you can notice that month after 3 months. So maybe a 7th month pregnancy you can notice earlier after 2+ months. Says Gemara, it can't be. If it's not a din in 3 months, 3 out of 9, but rather it's a third of the pregnancy, Lamali Gimel, Betray Util Sagya. So why do we need 3 months for this boy to be called an Av according to Rav Kudisbai? 2 1/3 months should be enough. So says the Gemara, what do we see? Must be that according to Rav Kudisbai, even a 7th month pregnancy you don't notice until a full 3 months. We go after the majority of cases which are 9-month pregnancies, so will not be a raya. From here we segue into a new din, the din of Ravina, which is going to be discussing how many of the dayanim are necessary. Amrua kamed Ravuna breid Rav Yeshua Amar lei din nefashas miazlina basaruba. You taught us that by Ben Sarah Meir din nefashas, his child could potentially get killed. We need to have roiv, a majority. But ask the Gemara, Taira Amra v'shavta Eida v'etzilu Eida. The Torah says the Eida shall judge and the Eida should rescue. What does that show us? That shows us you have to always give a benefit of the doubt. Why are you going basaraiv? Says the Gemara, it seemingly should have even more leniencies, asks the Gemara. Because if you're telling me, v'shavta Eida v'etzilu Eida, incorrect. Retract. Big mistake. I apologize. We're not asking on Roiv Dayanim. Mistake. I apologize. We just said a moment ago that how do we don the 3 months? The Roiv of the pregnancy. The Roiv of the pregnancies, that's how it's going to determine 3 months. But ask the Gemara, wait, what is the potential einish of this Ben Sarah Meir? The potential einish is going to be Misa. And the din by Misa is that we're always mekel. We look for leniencies. So says the Gemara, we should be why? If it's a 7th month pregnancy, it should be shorter. Meaning a shorter amount of time that this child can be a Ben Sarah Meir. A shorter amount of time equals a leniency. Says the Gemara, are you telling me we don't go basaroi? Vatanan. Again, that was kasha number 1. So Ravina responds, we had this already. We learned in a Mishnah back on Daf Mem. If one Eid says it happened on the 2nd, the other Eid says it happened on the 3rd. What's the halacha? Even though there's 1 day off, it must just be that they don't know if it was a leap year. These not a leap year. Excuse me. They didn't know that it was a full month versus a chaser month. Says the Gemara, and if you're going to tell me that Zilbasaruba, that in capital crimes we go above the majority, name Ahani Davka Kamisadi. So why don't we ask that, wait, why are we combining the Eidos? Don't say that maybe they didn't know. Rather the opposite. We should ask Zilba Saruba din she avdi ta'oi ve'ibura. 1 second. Elam Yishad Narin Zilba. Excuse me. Visa that Lomin is Oba Saruba, Nema Honey Davka Komisadi. Say the two Eidim are maybe being Bidavka. Vachushika Machshadadi, and they're actually contradicting each other. Meaning they're one day off and they're being Bidavka, now it's a stira, and they have to both be thrown out. Elolav, what must the reason be? Mishandin is Oba Saruba. For Ruba Denshi, Avdi the Tabi Bur, the Archa, and the majority of people make mistakes. So what do we see? We do go basar roif. So we have this steer over here. Do we yes go basar roif or do we not go basar roif? The Gemara is asking a kasha that seemingly Vetzilo Eida should teach us that we should go and find extra leniencies. The problem is that we see from the Mishnah and Daf Mem that we indeed go basar roif. So says the Gemara, Omer Rav Yirmiyah midifti afanan nami tanina. We as well learned the following Mishnah Nida. Bashol Shan V'Yamechem is Kadesh V'Biyah. She get married to V'Biyah V'Ba'alel Yavam Kana V'Yavam has relations with her. They are married. Yibam Chayv Alav Mishameshes Ish, and if she has relations, she has a din of Eshes Ish. Matam has Ba'ala, the Ba'ala is Tamei L'Tamei Mishka V'Tachta and Kalyan. It's a full-fledged Biyah. Nisis L'Kaina Chals with Shuma. She's a full-fledged marriage. Ba'alechem and Absulam Paslam and Akuna. Vim Ba'alechem and Kol Arayis and Murs Batera. Mumas and Eleho. They're going to get Misa. It's considered a regular Biyah V'hi Patura, and she will be Pater. So what do we see? We see that this girl who's 3 years old has a full-fledged din of Biyah. We turn over to Samach Testament base. Says Gemara, but wait, Vamai, why do we say that if someone has relations with her, that person can be killed based on it? Why do we say that it's a regular form of a biyah? Maybe perhaps she's an islandess. So maybe there could be a loophole. So what do we see? We see that we go again. Nachamol basaruba, elav dermin is a basaruba. So again, we have another raya. Then we go basarayv. Says Marlai, my chayiv alad diktani carbon. Vamumasin al yad diktani. What do you mean? It says you kill based on this. Vavim ba'alech. Mikol rice. Kitani says any of the rice are with her. Lachbayeskina the Kabbalah. Hallelujah. You know what the reason is? The reason is that someone accepted his 3-year-old as a wife, regardless if she's an islandess, and that's the reason why it's not a din of Raif. So that's how the Gemara settles this, that we do not necessarily have this as a raya. And now we move on, 8 lines down, Tanu Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, based over the previous brisa, what do we just see? We just saw that a girl has a din of biyah from age 3. What about a boy? Says the Gemara, Hamaseleles bimena katan. If a woman is inappropriate together with her son who is a minor, and she initiates some level of tashmish, ha'ara is where generally we refer to it as the zechilas biyah, that the Iver touches Isai Makaim. Says the Gemara, Beishamai Aimrim, Pasla min Akuna. Says Beishamai, she is pasal from Kuna. Why? It's considered that she has relations with someone who's an erva to her, and therefore she is pasal. Ubeisil say no, Beisil say Machshirin, she is still kosher, Likuna. What's the machlekes? Amar Rav Chia Breder Rav Rachmeni Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav Chisda Amar Aziri Akol Maidim 6 lines to the wide lines. Benteisha Shana V'Yem Echad. If this boy is 9 years old, should be Asay Biyah, it's a regular Biyah. Pachos Mishmayin, less than 8 years old, Shein Biyah Biyah. Everyone agrees that it's not a Biyah. So what's the machlekes Beishamei Beisil? Again, with a woman who has these inappropriate relations with her son, has this level of hara, like Nachuala ben Shmai, 9-8-year-old. Says Beishamai, we learn from the earlier generations that they got married at 8 years old, so we see it must be that the child's able to have tashmish. Says the Gemara, 1 second, Minala and Doilet. Where do we know that in earlier generations that these unions with an 8-year-old were able to provide, were able to have children? Says the Gemara, King Shliima Yamelech with the Shlomo's mother. Basheva. Maybe you're going to tell me the wife of Uriah Chitu, Ksiv in the Pasuk says, Eliam ben Achi Toivel Agiloini. Says the Gemara. So what's going on over here? Says the Gemara. Ksiv says the Psukim. And Hashem sent the hands of Nasan and Navi, and David HaMelech called Shlima, his name Yedidya, Ki Hashem, for Hashem. Uksiv in the Pasuk says, Vilish Nasayim Yamim, and it was after 2 years. Goizazim Avshalom, and Avshalom had sheep. Those who sheared the sheep. Uksiv in the Pasuk says, Avshalom Barach, Vayelech Yeshurah. Shalom ran away and went to Gashur, and he was there. Visham Shalosh Shanim. Uksiv in the Pasuk says, Vishav Avshalom B'Yushalayim, and Avshalom was in Yerushalayim Shenasayim Yamim. For 2 years, Ubnei HaMelech Leirah, he never saw the king. Uksiv Yimik Zarbaim Shana, and it was after 40 years. Avshalom HaMelech, Avshalom said to the king, Elchana, let me go now. V'Ashalim as Nidar, Elchana v'Ashalim as Nidarish, and Adar to Hashem, let me pay back my neder that I made to Hashem. B'Chevron, Uksiv in the Pasuk says, V'Achitevel Ra, and Achitevel saw. Kiloi Na'asasa Itzasai. Now Achitevel saw that they were not listening to his advice. V'Chavish his Chamar, and he saddled his donkey. V'Yakum, and he got up. V'Yelech, and he went out. El Beisai, to his house. V'Elira, into the city. V'Yitzav El Beisai V'Yechanak, and he commanded his household. V'Yechanak, 1 second. V'Yechanak, and he strangled himself. So what do we see when we do all the math? That when Achitofel died, Shlomo HaMelech was 7 years old. Says the Gemara, how do we know? Let's go through the psukim well. People of blood and deceit shall not live out half their days. All the days of Daig were 34. How many years Achitofel live? It's last 33. Subtract 7 years. That Shlima was when Achitofel died. Pashlu Esrim Vishes. We have 26 years left. That shows Achitofel had a grandson when he was 26 years old. So Dal Tartishneli, remove 2 years for what? Let's last Iburi for 3 pregnancies. What do we see? If someone's having a grandchild at age 24, must be that he gave birth at age 8. Bringing a raya that an 8-year-old can have children. And again, really, these psukim one has to go through properly to fully appreciate this. But says the Gemara Mimai, how do we know this? Maybe the two, Achitofel and Elam, had children when they were 9. Ubasheva or Yilid B'Shis. Bashelava is 6. Misham the Itera B'Rei. Because a woman is stronger. So proves the Gemara, how do you necessarily know how old Shlima was? You know that there's a child born after 24 years, a grandson. But says the Gemara, a great-grandson, excuse me. But how do you know that it was son? Maybe there was a daughter. And if there was a daughter, then maybe the girls get able to have children younger. So maybe Shlima was really 9. Well, I should say better, not Shlima, but Achitofel and Elam were 9. Basheva was 6. Says the Gemara, Teidan, I'll bring you a raya to what you're saying. The Have love lad mei kara. Basheva had children even before she gave birth to Shlomo HaMelech, and she certainly was no older than 8. So certainly Basheva could have been younger, and therefore we do not have a raya that a boy could have children starting at age 8. Back Bizman Chazal. Says the Gemara, Elamei Hachal, let's try another raya. Says the Torah, Terach, is Avram is Nachar, Ves Haran. Avram Gadol mi Nachar Shana. And Avram was 10 years older than Nachar, and Nachar Gadol mi Haran Shana. Names Avram Gadol Shtei Shana mi Haran. Avram was 2 years older than Haran, Uksivi Avram Nachar Lahem Nashim V'Gaimer. When the pasuk says Yascha, who is that referring to? That Sari Menu. Lama Nekushma Yescha Shesucha Beruach HaKodesh. She gazed at the Ruach HaKodesh Vaynu D'chsev Kol Asher Taimer Lecha Sar Shema B'Kola Tavaracha Yascha Shekol Sachem B'Yavim looked at her beauty Uksev Yibal Abana Vayitzchak Vayomer b'libai v'yisachik, and he laughed and he said, "How could this be? Kama kosher Avram Sarah? How much older is Avram from Sarah? Shnei, Eser shnin 10 years. V'kosher me Avua." And we show that Avram was Tartishnim, 2 years older than Sarah's father Haran. Ashtachik older Haran Sarah bitimna. So when you do the math, it comes out bitimna yilida that Haran gave birth to Sarah when he was 8 years old. So this is a raya that Bisman Chazal, that in the Torah they're able to give birth already at age 8. Says the Gemara, wait, your logic is faulty. Mimai. Tell Avram Zutadachu. How do you know Avram was older than Haran? Maybe he was younger. And the fact that Torah wrote Avram first was because he was wiser. Says the Gemara, Teidan, I'll bring you a raya that this is a possibility. Why? What's the raya? That the Torah writes in order of wisdom, not in age. And Noach was 500 years old. The only Noach Hashem, Scham Ves Yavesh, Shem Gadol Micham Shana, V'cham Gadol Miyavesh Shana. Nims Hashem Gadol Miyavesh Tei Shanim. Uksev and Noach went Sheish Mei Shana V'Ama B'Lo Yamayim Al Arz. It was 600. Uksev Elatol Hashem Shem Ben Mei Shana V'Yolet Esar Bachshad Shenatayim Achar Mal 2 years after Mal Ben Mei Shana Bar Mei V'Tarti Shenavai. Says Meraway, why tell me he's 100? It's really 102. The Torah writes it by way of who was wiser. And therefore the Gemara again does not have a raya. Why not? Because maybe he just wrote Avram before that, not that he was older, but he was wiser. If we don't have a raya that it's possible, even Bisman Chazal, for a boy, a male, to have a child at age 8. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from Rav Kana of Siyata Dishmaya.